Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Cadet Second Class Justin Yates, and I will serve as your Master of Ceremony. It is my privilege to welcome you to this afternoon's Cafe Corner character session with C1C Julia Rochester and Colonel Retired Gail Colvin. It is my privilege to introduce today's guest speaker, Colonel Retired Gail Colvin. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Ms. Colvin graduated from the Academy in the first class with women in 1980, where she was at the forefront of USAFA's gender integration and has been breaking barriers for women and minorities in the military ever since. She has extensive experience in organizational culture change, strategic planning, and creating respect-based cultures. Her 30-year military career is marked by diversified leadership experience in a wide variety of disciplines, including joint military doctrine, research and development, and weapons systems acquisition. She has commanded at the squadron and group level and served in a variety of positions at the Joint Staff, Headquarters U.S. Air Force, and major command levels. Currently, Ms. Colvin is the Director of Staff here at USAFA. She oversees a broad range of administrative, policy, and organizational functions of the Academy's 420-person staff, supporting the commission and university missions, as well as the installation's 10,000 personnel workforce. She is the first African American, first female, and first civilian to hold this position. She will be having a conversation today with C1C Rochester, who hails from Virginia Beach, Virginia, and will train to be a Space Force Intel officer after graduating in May. She currently serves as Cadet Wing Character Officer for Development and is excited to facilitate the discussion today. Audience, we ask that as you listen to Ms. Colvin, you ask questions using the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. For those attending in person, cadets will have microphones here for you to ask questions to Ms. Colvin. We will now begin the moderated question and answer portion. Cadet Rochester, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cadet Yates. And thank you, Ms. Colvin, for coming and joining us. I know the firsties here at USAFA are super excited to have this conversation with you, as well as other cadets that are able to tune in. Thank you so much to the live audience for spending some time with us. And you guys are going to help us ask some questions later on. Ms. Colvin, so you were a part of what we call the 80s ladies, that first class of women to kind of break barriers for cadets following that. What made you want to come to USAFA, first off?
Thank you so much for that question. I do want to take a moment, though, just to say thank you to you for the invite today. I'm really honored to be here. You know, when grads get to speak and have some interaction with cadets, it really brings about a lot of great emotions for us. And it's almost like there's this DNA, this connectivity. And so we really appreciate the opportunities to kind of share our experiences with you. And I just, one more other comment, there's like 43 days till graduation. And so I think about this conversation we're gonna have today. I think about the seniors, the firsties, who are really shifting their mindset from cadet, college student, however they saw themselves. And now you're gonna be pivoting to think about your professional military leadership. And this whole year, you've been thinking about the NCLS theme of warrior ethos. And so I think as you get ready to enter the Air and Space Forces, I think now you are really reflecting on some of these topics a little more. And I think about your leadership during COVID. And it wasn't really a typical year. I do think about how you think about innovation and change and all the tasks that the Chief of Staff of Air Force is asking us to think about, and you lived it this year. And so you're more than ready for what awaits you. And so back to your question, okay, I know. Why and how did I get here? So 3 things happened in 1975 that I think are relevant. One is I had already had 2 years of college. I'd run out of money. I was working a couple of jobs to cover the costs. So I'm now back home trying to figure out how I'm going to complete my college education. Second thing, in 1975, President Ford signed a public law that actually permitted women to attend the service academies. And then finally, in 1975, my oldest brother, Philip, who we call Benji, actually graduated here from the academy and stayed behind, as you all are aware, of seniors who stay behind for another year, work in admissions, help with outreach, help with a lot of the guiding candidates, and recruiting and assisting work. And so all of those things came together, and my brother really pushed for me to come to the academy and thought it was a way I could complete my education, which it was. It also really fit nicely with my own thoughts and models around service. Didn't know that I really wanted to be in the military, hadn't had that on my radar, but I say the space and time continuum came together, opportunity, right, preparation, and there I was in the first class in 1976.
So there you were in this first class. I know a question that a lot of cadets, we ask ourselves, so we know what got us here, but what made you stay at USAFA? What made you actually go into service? And might I say, come back to USAFA a couple more times to come help out in different capacities? What drove you? What was your motivation behind that?
And I think all of us have different reasons that we come, and I think you've heard this, and then there's different reasons you stay. I was driven by the desire to finish my degree. That was the primary thing. I also thought about my brother's service, and he's the oldest of 6 children, and he's always been very into the military. He knew he wanted to serve. It was something that I did think was noble. And over my 4 years here, I really developed my own sense of purpose around serving in the military, what it could look like for me. And so I think that's what kept me. I don't know that I thought I would stay 30 years, and that's what I did. But it seemed that over the years, I just really was the beneficiary of so many opportunities. I was able to do things that I hadn't thought I would ever be able to do, lead in certain capacities, and it just was something that stayed to be something intriguing for me and something that I grew a personal commitment around. And then happenstance that I had different capacities and different relationship with USAFA over the years. And that was everything from seeing it from the perspective of my, as a sibling, right? When my older brother went here, I saw what it was like through the eyes of my mother and father and my siblings when somebody leaves home, and what that does when you're watching from afar and the concerns you have there. Then, of course, I have my own experience as a cadet, which is an interesting one for myself. I live it, just as you all do. And then, in about 2008, my oldest son came here. So now I get to see it as a parent. And at that time, I'm already here serving as the Vice Commandant for Culture and Climate. So, you know, that lens and perspective takes on a different shape. I mean, I'm very much thinking that I want this experience to be great for every young man and woman who come here, but now my son is here, right? And what is that like for him and for me? And for him, you know, he kept asking me, can I change my name, my last name, so nobody knows, but it worked out. We respected each other's space. But then I'm seeing it with the concerns that a parent might have. And when I come back to work in that capacity, I also see it, you get to start to see everything that's involved to make this place run. And so when you're a cadet, I don't think that I had any idea what's happening behind the screen, logistically, you know, all the politics. And you get to see that when you come back on the other side. And then now on the staff, I really get to see a lot of the business side of the house, the administration. I see the politics. I see all the people who have oversight of the academy and what that relationship is like, and all the constituents there are, and there are many that care so deeply about your experience here. And so I really like that I've been able to have this full circle kind of, experience.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this before, where we just had our National Character and Leadership Symposium in February, and we focused on the concept of warrior ethos and really delved into how that fit into civilian life, into military life. But for you, and the many hats that you not only wore here for USAFA, but also in your military career, your 30-year military career, and your civilian career, how did you see the concept of warrior ethos or grit play into your service role? And did it change over time depending on the different circumstances you were in, or the different environments and climates and cultures that you were becoming accustomed to?
And that's a great question. And I think if you remember back to when the senior leadership did their roundtable and talked about it, you heard very different takes on what warrior ethos can mean from where you are in uniform, whether you are actually someone who is on the pointy end of the spear, if you're in the support side. For civilians, the Chief Master Sergeant, our command chief, thought talked, I thought, very eloquently on her own journey. And so when you think about that for yourselves, it does, I think, change over time, because where I sit now, I think back on my journey, and warrior ethos means, it has two aspects to it, contribution and commitment. So let me talk about commitment first for me, because when I think about warrior ethos, I think about my personal commitment to the profession of arms, and for me, it was to the Air Force, in uniform and out. I think about my personal commitment because I think it's something that you think about when you committed here at the Academy, and as you go into the Air Force. I now took a personal oath. I've taken it in my military capacity, I've taken it in a civilian capacity, and so that whole concept of what did I sign up to? What did I swear to uphold? What does it mean for me in terms of upholding the Constitution, putting my life on the line if necessary? And am I willing to do all the things around moral and physical courage that it demands of you? And so I think as you grow in your time in the service, those things take on different meanings at different points, but it is about your personal commitment and what you've sworn to do. I think it's also about contribution to the mission. And I know for a lot of people it's different things, and I think if we think about the recent communication from General Brown, where he talked about the new Air Force mission, to fly, fight, win, air power, anytime, anywhere. It's not just about that mission. If you read his mission and his vision for all of us, I thought that's really telling, because it really is saying, no matter what you do on the spectrum of activities and endeavors that help deliver air power, then we are all air power, and we all contribute. And that's really part of your profession of arms and warrior ethos. I think about my career, and I have a couple of examples. So I think about the commitment piece, and I think about 9/11. I happened to be in the Pentagon on that day, as many others were, and I think about that realization that this could be a time that the war has come to us on our soil, conflict has, and people could die in this building this day, and people did. And I just remember my own situation and feelings that day, but feeling that I had given what I was supposed to give. I was doing my duty. I worried a little about my family, but I was kind of ready. I figured that's the business we're in, and things like that can come your way. And then I think about contribution. So I started out in acquisition, and so for me, I think there were very clear connections. I was in the business of helping to develop weapon systems, missile systems, right? Upgrades to aircraft. And so those were things that helped deliver air power and to help the Air Force's mission. So I felt a very real contribution to that. I think about the time that I worked in joint doctrine. And so that was also a very real contribution, because that was the business of thinking about what are the playbooks. You think about how you fight wars in coalition kind of settings, joint settings, not only with other services, but with our allied partners overseas, in NATO. And so it was doing the work of thinking about what does that look like? Everything from the tactics of, do we use similar munitions? Do we buy the same kind of weapon systems? If not, how are they interoperable? When we're out there fighting, who's responsible for the air cover? Who's responsible for different things? And it also was a time that I really started thinking heavily about diversity and inclusion, because these allied partners are not like us. They may think differently about what's right, how you fight. They think differently about a lot of things. And how do you develop relationships with people so that when you do have to be in that setting in conflict, everyone agrees how we're going to do this? And how do you develop respect for each other? America and the US, we can't go in every situation and always be the ones in charge. People have to feel like they're making a contribution. Otherwise, why are they there if we're going to do everything? So the political arms of their countries have decided we were engaged in these agreements, but we got to do the real roll up your sleeves work and think about who's good at what talents do they have, how can they contribute, and how do we balance all those things? So really a very clear linkage for me, again, of contributing to delivering the Air Force's air power.
Absolutely. And it sounds like within that, we're doing a lot of personal reflection on our commitment and what's our contribution, as well as doing an external reflection on what our partners and our service members, as well as from other forces from different countries, can contribute as well. On that note, next year, we're going to be transitioning into the NCLS 2022 theme, which is ethics and respect for human dignity. And taking care of your people, respecting your people, understanding your people, I feel like goes hand in hand with that kind of commitment level that we're supposed to have as service members as we go out and we become second lieutenants and officers in the Air Force. And so for you, ma'am, do you mind giving an experience where you saw somebody cultivate a climate of respect and dignity, or possibly an example of when you didn't see that happening and how that might have stifled your ability to commit and to contribute for you to develop your warrior ethos?
No, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, because I do think that over time you see examples of, people giving respect and not giving respect. I do want to frame it in the context of it's good leadership, though. If you just think about it, how do you get the best out of the talent that you are charged to take care of? Because leadership is really taking care of the people and the airmen under your charge. You want to have the effect of accomplishing the mission, but it is always tied to people. And it's not a new concept when you think about it. When I came in the Air Force a long, long time ago, years ago, over 40 years ago, I heard about the Air Force family. I heard leadership in the Air Force talk about how do we make sure we're getting the best out of everybody? How do we take care of quality of life issues, their families, the things that really strengthen people and allow them to come to work every single day ready to give their best? So it's really not new. But when we think about what's happening in our country with our demographics, right, we are getting more diversified. There is going to be a point where we really don't have groups that are more dominant than others. And so how do we think about this, and how do we make sure we have the right tools to lead diverse teams? Because that's just the strategic imperative, right? Effective leadership, but it's going to mean diverse teams. That's the nature of it. Now, I think we go back to the warrior ethos and some of those principles. I think we would all agree that dignity and respect morally is the right thing, and we want to be good leaders that way morally. But when you think about what's happening with demographics, we have young men and women from all over this country, from different backgrounds, right? Different religious persuasions, different ways, different ethnic identities, just a very wide range of backgrounds. And you couple that with, in the mid-70s, the all-volunteer force. Because now we have people who are choosing to serve, and they do come from these backgrounds. So how do we motivate them? How do we make them feel like they're part of the team? I think it's key that people have a sense of belonging and really do feel like you value what they're doing. I think some of you know retired Colonel Shauna Kimbrell here, who's the first African-American female pilot. And I love that she always says, people who are valued add value. And there's so much truth to that. If you feel like, think of what your ego feels like, what the excitement is when the group does embrace you and you feel like you've done something that makes a difference. And when we alienate, think of what that feels like and does. So when I think about times in my own life when I've had examples of respect or a lack thereof, I think there's one story I'll share. I just remember that I was a seated squadron commander. I was up for promotion, and the system, the way it worked was your supervisor, the wing commander, gave out definitely promotes to some people, and then you could have promotes, and I happened to get a definitely promote. I'm not sure how everybody on the base knew, but they knew. But what ensued was a lot of conversation around the only reason I got that was because I was Black and I was a woman, right? So these people don't know me, they don't know what I do necessarily, but they've come to that conclusion. And it got to a point where lots of people on the base were walking up to me and saying, that's why that happened. So for me, that wasn't really a big deal because I continued to do what I was doing. But I noticed that our wing commander called at that time, an officer's call, like an all call. And he started to explain, without any pre-coordination with me, the process that he went through to give a DP. And I'm sitting there and I'm not even sure how to feel, feeling a little awkward because I think he's talking about me.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But I thought what courage and bravery and leadership on his part to try to dispel some of what he saw going on in his unit. So he's talking about, okay, I'm talking about people who have commanded. And mind you, I'm a second-time squadron commander, had completed all the professional military education, was performing at a great level. And he just went through all the things that he considers when he gave that out, and then challenged people if they had a problem with that to come see him. And we never talked about it. I mean, I feel really badly that I never to this day really thanked him. I just didn't know what to do. But that's leadership. I think we saw it here a couple of years ago when we had the racial slur incident at the prep school, and General Severi got up on the staff tower and brought all the leadership from across all the MEs with him and very clearly laid out his expectation as the leader for our behavior and how we stand on these issues of having people who don't look like us or act like us or think like us in certain ways, but they're part of the team. And if we can't buy into that, then we don't belong here. That's a very clear articulation by a leader. I think of the work General Clark's doing here in terms of continuing the work from the racial disparity review and just thinking in terms generally of how he's going to have a D&I executive council, how we're going to think about these things, have these tough conversations, because we want people to feel a part. You want to get the most out of it. And back to the demographics, think of the value proposition. If people don't look like us and there's all these demographics, are we willing as leaders to waste talent? It's about talent management as well. And if you think that we can do in this country without having some portion of the population be on board to defend what we believe in, then I think we have to rethink that a little bit. So I think we all have examples here of where we do those things as well, but I really am just encouraged by the work we're doing here to think about these issues, find ways to have the conversations. It's not always easy. And as you go out, especially the seniors and you're leading teams, again, it goes back to relationship and thinking about how you make sure everybody in your unit at least has a relationship. So when these difficult things come up, you can have a conversation. Doesn't mean you're going to solve it, but you know where to get resources and you can try to have these conversations. And you look at what's happening in the country at large, and these are the young women and men that you're going to lead, and those things will affect them at home and they'll bring it to the workplace. And you've got to get a way to talk to them, have some teamwork going on so that we can move through these things and do what we do as a team to do the mission, in my mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. I think really pinpointing the fact of inclusion and perspective taking are tools that we have that will help us foster a more respectful environment, no matter where we're kind of moving around, especially for us firsties who are going to be going into our first base assignments or tech school. How can we practice kind of what you were talking about, where leadership is taking a step and taking a role and making sure that the environment is a respectful, dignified place when we're not necessarily the top of the totem pole. We're not necessarily in that direct leadership position. How can we go into an environment and help foster respect and dignity?
I think you practice it here, really. If you think about it, you come from all over the country. You know, by design, Congress and law have mandated that we are geographically diverse. And if we do that right, we get a lot of other kinds of diversity. So that's part of how this place was designed, and you do it, and you meet people who aren't like you. I say at your level, you know, we all do what we can where we are. If you are somebody who is curious about others, you know, and that's not disrespectful to say, gee, tell me something about your religion, your this, the food you eat. In the military, we travel around the world in different bases, and it's interesting to me that on one hand, we like that we do all of that, and we get exposure to different cultures, and we adopt things that we like, whether it's food or dress or ways of being. And we should do the same things in our unit. Take the time to just walk up to somebody and try to establish those relationships, bring them into your circles, and learn about things you don't know about them. And that makes it easier to have the difficult conversation later, or for them to at least know that you respect them. And you don't have to agree on everything, but they know that when they have a conversation with you, you are respectful. And I think it's kind of that simple, just communication and building relationships.
No, absolutely. Like you pointed out, building those relationships, being willing to communicate with other people, acknowledging the differences that we have between one another, and finding places of similarities as well as those differences, I think is really important for us. So we're going to transition into some live questions because we want to make sure we have plenty of time to kind of hear what not only our Zoom audience has to say, but also our live audience here with us today. So for those who are here in person, if you guys have a question that you're kind of thinking about, feel free to flag one of our runners and they'll bring a mic to you. But we're going to go to Cadet Padilla to ask some questions from the Zoom.
Okay.
Thank you, Cadet Rochester. Our first question from Zoom is, what actions should we take to actually reap the benefits of diversity? This cadet does not simply believe that having diverse people in an organization has a large benefit compared to using their experiences in the mission. Ms. Colvin, would you care to respond?
Read it one more time for me.
Yes,
I want to make sure I
ma'am.
get it all.
What actions should we actually take to reap the benefits of diversity? This cadet does not think that simply having diverse people in an organization has a large benefit compared to using their experiences in the mission.
I guess I would say, think about even diversity of thought. If you're solving a problem, I don't know, I'm a very collaborative type person, and you can ask people in my front office. Sometimes if I'm working on a letter or a memo, if more people come in with me and we start doing the wording, if we understand the issue, it's a better product at the end, it communicates better. So this is a very simple, and maybe not exactly what you're talking about, but I guess I would say I would challenge you that you don't see the benefit to diversity. I mean, it's like the two heads are better than one kind of thing. The more people that different perspectives, they see it differently and they come up with different solutions. I think of my time in the joint doctrine world, and when we were talking about different scenarios and how we were going to do it with the different countries and trying to understand who had strengths, who had weaknesses, who had what, how are we going to agree on the radio calls, what, all those things. The more we talked as a group, the better the solution was. And the more people could sign up to the solution, they could see themselves in it, and everyone could agree that's a way to go forward. So, and I think you're not going to have much of a choice. As I said, the country's going to look a different way. So you're going to have to think about what the benefits could be. And time and the future, we think about the Institute for Future Conflict that's being stood up here, and that's a part of it. Thinking about conflict in the future, how we're going to fight these things, but there's a component around that of competency. When you get assigned overseas, there is usually a training period, or you're getting materials, you're thinking about cultural competencies so you can understand others, understand other cultures, be respectful, so you don't step on it and put your foot in your mouth or do something because you really want to have a relationship. Why would that be any different as our country changes in the way that we look in our demographics, that we wouldn't want to develop some cultural competencies as we understand each other so that we can have a force where we're thinking about what each person is bringing and how we can leverage that for the greater good. That would be my response.
Absolutely. Critical thinking and using more minds to get to that kind of outcome is really important. If Cadet Padilla wants to read another Zoom question that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cadet Rochester. Our next question is, for those of us who feel that we don't provide much diversity to a team, how can we develop ourselves to stand out and bring something new to the table?
But I think we all have talents, and some of that is, how do you get the confidence? How do you, I think you come at it from a lot of different ways. Some is, I know I've tried all my career to think about my own, develop and grow, and how I become a better professional, competent in my field, whether that's training I have to get in my skill set, whether it's development just around my professional skills and what that looks like, and getting help in that area. But we all do have something to contribute. It goes back to that contribution. And how can you constantly work on yourself to make sure you do have something to bring to the table, and don't undersell yourself, because if you think you have nothing to bring, you do. You may not have just thought about it. I think about my development in the Air Force as a young officer, and especially after the experience here. And quite frankly, here at the Academy, I was told things sometimes around, you took somebody's slot, you're here because you're Black, because you're a woman, okay, but, my human packaging is my human packaging. I can't really do anything about that, so I had to really put that in its proper place and then get on with my business of developing myself and doing what I think I needed to do. So I tried very hard in my early years not to have people see me as Black and a woman. And I think looking back, not probably the best thing to do because I had something of value to bring. But I just want everyone to look at my work and say, okay, she's competent, she's doing great work, and not even think about these other things. But then I had several bosses and supervisors who at different points in my career really helped me to see that they needed to hear from me, not only as a competent professional, but as someone who's Black, as someone who's a woman, coming to the table to give perspective. And you do have a voice, and you find it. And so I think of a time when we were talking, it was a meeting around women, and women, some people seemed to have the point of view that the women were pregnant and then we couldn't deploy, and what the drain it was on the rest of the units and all of these things. And so, I thought, well, let me just do a little research, because, you're sitting there and you're feeling uncomfortable as they're saying these things. Well, it really wasn't true. There were actually more men who were, for various reasons, and some medical legit reasons, but they were not able to deploy. So it wasn't true that the women the women were not deploying at a higher rate, causing all this work to fall back on the rest of the unit. And so when you can present the facts sometimes and say, okay, let's think about this a little, and why are we talking about this just in terms of the women? Why don't we look at the whole issue and see what's going on? And so you find your voice, and you find that you're able to say, no, as a person of color, as a woman, there's a perspective to my service that really will help benefit everybody.
Absolutely. I think we have a question in the live audience, so we'll go to her now.
Hi, ma'am. Cadet First Class Sierra DeHart from Cadet Squadron 12. Thank you for being here with us, first of all. Being one of the ladies of the 80s, one of the questions I have to ask was, how was your renowned, we probably all remember it well, I-Day? Furthermore, what was your outlook going into that and the application? How did that outlook change or develop through your roles in your career and those barrier-breaking things that you did?
So thank you for that question. So that I-Day was a very memorable one for me, and some of you may have heard this story because I had the 2 years of college. When I got here, I thought I was a transfer student.
Oh no.
So, and my recruiter was my brother, who went here for 4 years, and so I continually wonder how I missed this part of the conversation. But it was interesting because, I pull up to, you didn't have a bus. I think I can't remember how I got here exactly, but I remember seeing people being yelled at, thinking about what I did think I knew from my brothers telling me what it was like, and thinking, boy, I'm so glad I'm not with those people getting yelled at, because I'm a transfer student. So I walk up to cadets, and mind you, I'm about the same age as some of the seniors, right? Because of my 2 years at college, 1 year working, and I'm trying to explain to them who I am. I'm a transfer student. Where do the transfer students go? And they're just yelling at me, and I think, okay, well, I'm gonna find an adult because clearly they don't understand who I am. So I find an adult, Major Wade was his name, because I just remember looking at his name tag and saying, where do the transfer students go? And he laughs hysterically and points me back to the group that's being yelled at. So, okay, so now I'm not in the best frame of mind because I'm thinking, how did I miss this? How did my brother, why didn't he tell me I'm starting all over again 4 years? And it was just a series of things. I mean, there's the infamous haircuts we got the very first day, and mine was probably looking quite like Cadet Brown over here by the time they got done. Just a series of things, and me thinking that I had to start over and complete another 4 years. I just really couldn't get that right in my head that day. So the day had some fits and starts. And then I just think again about what the day was like for my classmates, the women and the men. Lots of media attention. Anytime anything's new, right, the media kind of globs on, and they're there. My roommate, Utley Cornarin, still says, the cameras in our faces really resulted in upperclassmen in our faces, because we were trying really hard to fit in, right, to be part of the team. And so anything that made us look special and highlight the fact that we were different and other really didn't play to our being accepted very well. And in fact, it probably alienated even some of our male classmates who are doing the same things we're doing during basic, but we're getting all the press and the coverage. So that wasn't really a good look for us, right? We didn't really like that. I mean, there were people here who just didn't really want women here either. And so you had to deal with some of those things. But I would say, to the Academy's credit, they did some planning. And so I think about diversity and inclusion there. If you're going to open up an organization, if you're going to say you want to embrace diversity, I think you think about that saying about diversity is who's in the room and inclusion is what you do in the room. Because diversity, yes, they brought women in, but the Academy had an O plan around what it was going to look like when the women were here. What would we wear? Where would we live? Some of those issues that at least they were trying, and I commend them for that, for trying to think through what inclusion would look like in classrooms, in the dorms. They hadn't really redesigned the bathrooms yet, so the urinals are there, but they did put little plants in them, so they tried to make it look appealing. They were thinking about our sense of belonging. And I also think about that, it was also called the Pink Plan, and it's up in the library because it has a pink cover, and they looked at various uniforms, and I'm really, really glad they didn't pick culottes and white go-go boots for our parade uniforms.
That was an option?
It was an option.
Oh, no.
But it makes me think about doing the work of inclusion, making everyone feel a part so they can contribute as well. And that just stuck with me throughout my whole career whenever I thought of working with teams and how do I ensure that every single person, I'm intentionally trying to get their input and to think about how they see the problem, because that might just spark a chain reaction in others where you go, oh, maybe not that, but this. And it really does kind of, it has an effect. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we have another response in the audience.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Cadet 4th Class Keelan Lorenzo from CS40. Thank you for coming out today. My question says, I'm a dually, and so next year I'm going to have a coachee, and as we go up through the academy, and once we become officers, we're going to have people under us. And so how do we make sure that we value people while also still maintaining professionalism? Because I want to be careful that I don't breach that relationship and mess up how the unit will run.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's a great question. And so there is a distinction between being someone's friend, right, and being their supervisor, their coach. This is a military organization, and we can't make any mistakes or have any hesitation about that. There's structure, there are levels, there's hierarchies, but it doesn't mean that you don't have relationships with people. And the relationship part is where you get to understand what their needs are, their values, how you coach them through. Maybe you need to give them different perspective on things. It doesn't mean that I'm your friend. I mean, I remember going to a base, and I was going to be the mission support group commander, and there were so many young African-American males who were like, we have a black commander. They were so happy, and when I went through the gate, they were saying that, and I said, I'm not a black commander. I'm the commander, right? I'm not their buddy. I'm not going to get them out of situations. I'm going to hold fair and equitable standards, but I'm going to coach you because that's part of my job to develop you as well. So I'm going to have a relationship with you. I'm going to see where you're at. I'm going to hear what your challenges are. I'm going to try to help you overcome that. So I think you don't have to cross the line, but you can still have constant communication, understand where people are at, because that is your job, right? To make sure that you're developing people, making sure they're training, they have the equipment they need, and the quality of life issues are addressed. It just doesn't mean that you're their buddy, and it's actually a very clear distinction in my mind.
Thank you for that question. I actually have a tag on to that. Here at USAFA, we see the words coach and supervisor and mentor thrown around. What kind of are the differences between acting as somebody's coach, acting as somebody's supervisor, and acting as somebody's mentor? Do you see a difference through those, or in your career, how do you see those? So
I think the supervisor is the person who has direct responsibility for you, who's evaluating you. So that's, you work for your supervisor, and so that's usually clear. That's where the expectations for your performance. If you have questions on how you're supposed to be executing jobs, that's that relationship. Coaches and mentors are people who you go to just for advice, I think. So you can get an outside perspective on how things could be done. Maybe you can expand your range of options, because sometimes maybe your supervisor isn't communicating something quite in a way that clicks for you. And so these are just other voices that really are there to help you think about alternatives and really are also vested in your development, I think. That's how I see that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to throw it back to our Zoom audience. If Cadet Padilla could say one more question that we got in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cadet Rochester. Ms. Colvin, our last question is, referring back to your experience with the wing commander who gave you a definitely promote, how do we instill that aspect of leadership in ourselves, our squadrons, and those we will lead in the future?
Well, I think some of it is just doing what you know is right? So he had his clear set of guidelines for himself. He was clear on what he had as the threshold for who gets that, right? And so if we're clear, we can defend in our communications and our expectations with people. You can always defend what you've done, right? And there was no hidden bias. This is just my rubric. This is how I'm doing it, and I can explain that. And I think we develop that in ourselves by really thinking about the things you learn here when you're a critical thinker. Are you really questioning? Do you take the time to question yourself, your own motivations sometimes? And are you being fair and equitable? And then if you can communicate those things, I think that just helps you when you're explaining it to others and having the dialogue. Because I mean, he needed to coach others on, okay, here's the things I'm looking at. If you don't have those things, then you're not getting my consideration. But that doesn't mean that as a leader, he didn't then continue to develop people so that they could also kind of achieve those things that they wanted to.
I'm going to actually try to sneak in one more question. And this is for all of us as we try to develop as officers in the Air Force and just as human beings, a part of our community. A lot of what we're told is you should go read a book on leadership or go listen to a podcast. So do you have any recommendations for us in the cadet wing, the firsties going in to the Air Force that we could kind of look at to kind of give us direction on this course?
So a couple things. So if you look at the Chief of Staff of the Air Force's reading list, he has Lincoln on Leadership. Personal favorite of mine for years. It's a nice, simple read. I like things that are kind of quick and easy for me to absorb. And I think it talks about some of the things that Wade Lincoln led, but it also does some extrapolation into the future on how he might handle some things going on in the world today. So I like that one. When I think about some of the things as you prepare for NCLS, diversity and inclusion, Air Force actually has a diversity and inclusion reading list. And there's some good things on here. So I would check that out if I were you as well. We've already, as an institution, thought about some of these books. Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. She was here as a speaker. So you're going to see some familiar things as well. And then I went to our Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Joe Don Looney, and he highly recommends Code Switch, which is a weekly podcast on NPR. And I also like NPR because, again, I like the easy, digestible, how do you keep up with current events across the spectrum of arts and other things going on in the world. And I want to commend Dr. Looney to you because he's someone you could also talk to if you do have particular different interests. He might have some resources for you as well. So I appreciate all the questions. This time just really flew by. And I just appreciate your attention and turn it back over to you, Cadet Rochester.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ms. Colvin. We appreciate your willingness to share your perspective with us. Your unique background and experiences have broadened our perspective and will help us continue our journey as leaders of character. This concludes today's event. We would appreciate audience feedback, so please take a moment to answer the brief survey linked to the QR code that will be posted here shortly. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you all. Great.